Welcome to the SOULbriety Podcast, where we talk all things from addiction to awakening and the recovery of self, soul, and spirit from being strung out on the greatest drug of all, the external world. This is a place for illuminating conversations that will take you from divided to divine, pain to purpose, and suffering into SOULbriety. I'm your host, Lindsay Caracardi, and this podcast is for all the rebel souls who have always sought to live deeply, authentically, and fully expressed as the divine badasses you are. All right, divine badasses, rebel souls. It's Lindsay here. I am a spiritual practitioner and coach. I'm a teacher, a seeker, and the author of 2 books, Fractured and The Chakras, a real-life, no bullshit guide to healing your life. Welcome to another divine download of SOULbriety, the very first episode. And I'm so excited to be launching this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful divine inspiration that is the SOULbriety Podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about inspiration, birthing your purpose, and how your greatest pains are actually often the greatest catalysts to your own divine badassery. And I'm going to be doing this today by sharing a little bit about me, who I am, how I got here, and the moment that everything in my life changed. So welcome to today's episode. And really today, as I was feeling into it, as I was feeling into the energy that I wanted to set this ship out into the quantum realm of creation, and the intention was really inspiration. The intention was to be able to really inspire to you and illustrate to each one of you the actual power you have as a divine being, and the power of the creative process and how it's always working for us perfectly, even when it might feel like everything is falling apart. And I will never, ever, ever forget that day. That day that this all dropped into me is still seared into my memory as though I'm standing right there in that backyard in SoCal. And so what I want to share with you is just how our suffering is, like I said in the start, right? Just a divine catalyst for the unfoldment of our own awakening. Because so many of you, I know right here, right now, that so many of you, like me, have struggled with addiction, codependency. That addiction might have looked in a lot of different ways, just all the ways that we have given our power to the outside world. I know that I'm not alone, and I know that you're not alone. And some of you may be sober from drugs and alcohol the way that I am. Others of you, it may be that you're calling back your power from giving it to relationships or giving it to a job. Others, it may be food. Others, it may just be that awakening that's happening all around the world right here, right now, as we call our power back from that external world called the matrix, right? And it's through this awakening that you are going to birth who you are, what your power is, and what you are here to do. And so today I'm going to share a little bit about my story and how it unfolded perfectly so that you can begin to see how yours may be unfolding perfectly, even if you can't see it right here, right now. And I'll just never forget that day that I went from addicted to awakened in one leap of faith, one crucial moment of decision. There I was, right? I was standing in this backyard in this hot California sun. It's early summer. The sky is blue, and I'm crying my eyes out. And as I'm standing there taking long drags of my cigarettes, because you better believe I still had a cigarette habit back then, and I'm smoking my cigarette. And I had no idea in that moment that the decision that I was about to make would change my life. Honestly, like at that point, at that moment, it felt like my life was over, right? And how many of you can relate to those moments where you were being pushed to make a decision and it just felt like no matter what you chose, it was over, right? It just felt scary. So in that moment for me, it felt like I was standing on a precipice, but of what? I didn't know. I didn't know what was in store for me. It seemed like there was this split second, this split moment in between inhale and exhale where my destiny was sealed in. But in actuality, it was written long before that moment. In actuality, it had been written lifetimes before that moment. And you see, in hindsight, what I've come to realize is that that moment had been about 15 or 20 years in the making, right? And like I said, in fact, it was probably lifetimes in the making. But at that moment in time, as I was standing in that backyard smoking my cigarette, I didn't have the consciousness yet to understand that. So as I stood there smoking, I could feel the release happening in my body as I surrendered. I felt myself give in that moment where I said, okay, I'm going to stay. And as I spoke those words, okay, I'm going to stay, there was this visceral shift that happened in my body. And as I spoke the words, it was literally as though a portal opened and I stepped through it. Right. And again, I didn't have the consciousness to understand that in that moment, but in hindsight, that's what it was like. And I stepped through it into a very, very, very different version of myself. Right. In one split moment, I stepped out of the version of me, the version of reality where I was a hopeless, strung out drug addict, where I was a defeated loser living on the fringe of society, where I wanted to die. And I stepped into the version of myself who was a divine spiritual being, who had a choice, who was powerful. So you see, in that moment, right, I couldn't see the bigger picture, but I was being asked to step into the unknown. And the Bible tells us, there's a quote in the Bible about faith being belief in things unseen. And again, I didn't know it at the time, but that agreement to stay, that moment that my choice was restored, I was demonstrating my faith in things unseen, because I was demonstrating my faith in a belief that my life could be different. And up until that point in time, a different life was a thing unseen. A belief in myself was a thing unseen. It wasn't something that I knew. Okay. So I'll never forget what it felt like, right? In that moment, to have that choice. After years of living in the choiceless powerlessness of drug addiction, I felt the liberation unfold in my consciousness for the first time in a very long time. Probably for the first time since I was a child, I felt freedom and liberation be restored to me, even though I was also terrified in that moment. Right? So what I was saying yes to in the external world was the agreement to not return to Mammoth Lakes, California, where I had been living. I was saying yes to going to long-term treatment. I was saying, but on the energetic and spiritual plane, what I was saying yes to was my higher self. I was saying yes to my healing. I was saying yes to the surrendering to God's will for me, right? I was saying yes to the thing that I had been seeking so badly. Like Rumi tells us, what you seek is seeking you. And in that moment that I said, yes, I'll stay, I didn't know it, but I was saying yes to the thing that I had been crying out for over 15 years. And again, what I didn't know at that time was that sometimes for us to receive the thing that you want most, right, which in my case had always just been connection and love and purpose, what I didn't know at the time was that sometimes for us to receive the very thing we want most, we have to allow part of ourselves to die. And in that moment where I said yes, I was allowing that part of myself to die. I was releasing that part of myself that had been so powerless. And I was stepping in to meet what I had been seeking. I was opening the door to what I had been seeking. So I agreed to, go to the treatment center. I agreed to leave my old life behind. And in that moment, the liberation that I had been seeking found me. As I just agreed to recognizing that I had no idea how to run my life, something happened in that moment. Something happened in that moment where instead of running back to my old life and my old ways and my old mind, right, which that old mind was the mind of myself when I was in a lot of pain. It was my divided mind. In that moment where I surrendered, my future suddenly rippled out in front of me with a new light. It rippled out in front of me like a beautiful, like when you come over a river or you cross over the Grand Canyon and you see the river at the bottom, right? Or you come over, a rise and all of a sudden you see this mountain range out in front of you. It was like my future suddenly was alive. The vibration of hope had been awakened within me as I had the thought, maybe it's possible, right? And that was that moment of faith for me. That was that moment of faith. So the months that followed that, right? I'd love to tell you, oh yeah, like it was just easy. No, but the months that followed that were deep, deep work for me. It was deep healing, deep transformation, lots of inner work. I want to make a point to not gloss over the profound commitment that I made in that moment of surrender, the profound dedication and the discipline that unfolded because of that dedication, right? I don't want to gloss over that because I feel oftentimes many coaches and spiritual people don't actually share the raw, dirty details of what it takes to truly have a spiritual transformation out of being, broke, lack, scarce, codependent, addicted, frustrated, feeling powerless, feeling like a victim, to go to empowered and knowing your true self as a creator. It takes work. It takes healing, right? We've got to subconscious reprogram. We've got to connect with the divine. We've got to clear out all the clutter in our subconscious mind. And I don't want to minimize that. So that next year, I was just fully devoted to it. And through that devotion, I was reborn, right? But the real rebirth happened in that moment, standing in the grass where I made that decision, where I surrendered. That was the moment of spiritual rebirth. And then from there, my path unfolded for me beautifully. And what I started to realize as I went through my own healing journey was that our suffering arises from disconnection from God, from source, from spirit. I don't care what you want to call it. But when I believed I was disconnected, if you are out there believing that you are disconnected, it is going to feel painful. That's where the suffering, the overwhelm, right? What we don't understand when we're in it is that through that suffering, that's where we actually reawaken the connection. That's where we actually begin to understand who we truly are, because it's through that contrast, like Abraham Hicks tells us, right? Through that contrast, we begin to remember who the hell we are. And we come back to that. So as I sit here now, 8 years later, it's in hindsight that I truly understand that the years of immense suffering and pain had primed me. I can recognize that my creation of extreme powerlessness, my commitment to addiction and my commitment to powerlessness as an addict were priming me to know my full power now, right? And so what I want to say to each one of you in this moment is that whatever it is you're experiencing and creating for yourself, whether it's, an experience of lack or scarcity or feeling unloved or feeling alone or feeling addicted or feeling powerless or comparison, right? Whatever it is, this thing that you're creating, the equal and opposite plus more is available to you, right? So like for me, it was all of this powerlessness. So you better believe that when I tapped into my powerfulness, it was like, there was so much power available to me, right? So if it's love you're seeking and you're feeling so unlovable, the amount of love that's actually waiting for you to tap into it is going to blow your mind. I promise you that, right? I promise you that. So for me, the toiling of my addiction, right? It had made me so hungry for that awakening. It had made me so hungry for my power and my connection that the moment I was able to create space for my soul to take charge, it was just like, woof, like a tidal wave. And it was so beautiful. And when I reflect about why I coach and teach and why I'm going on to become a minister and a doctor of divinity, I'm training for all that right now. It's really because I come back to that moment, right? And why I do this podcast, I come back to that moment. And that moment, that was the moment of liberation from my own personal prison of my divided self, right? In that moment, the door of my prison cell opened. And I was able to later recognize that my prison was built of my own divided mind, my own feelings of separateness from God and separateness from my power and separateness from you, right? And in that moment, I was set free. And the key to my prison in that moment was handed to me in the form of two amazing human beings who stood firm and they held the truth for me. They believed in me in a way that I didn't yet believe in myself as I decided what to do. They held space and they called me forward, right? They reflected back to me potential, hope, and support that allowed me to have a moment of clarity where I said yes to spirit. Because they created that space for me, I was able to see clearly through the fog of my own divided mind long enough to see a different future for myself. And I think of them when I think about why I do this work, because they had such a profound impact on my life when I felt like I didn't have any power, right? And I want my desire, my deepest heart desire is to give that same impact and that same chance and open that door of hope for others, right? And I just feel so deeply that I am here to hold truth for the collective. I'm just so called to this work, this truth work, this healing work, SOULbriety, reclaiming God, bringing consciousness back into our awareness and our growth. This is ascension. This is evolution, right? And that's why I teach this. That's why I share this. This is a calling for me. It's a calling of the deepest part of my soul who fully knows that every bit of suffering I created for myself was a perfect divine experience for the development of my own consciousness. And that power that is restored in knowing that I created every bit of it, that is what I want to be able to pass on to each one of you. And so in closing, I just want to share with you another passage from the Bible. And it's not that I'm religious, but I celebrate in New Thought. I study and celebrate as I'm studying to become a minister and a doctor of divinity. I celebrate all faiths. But in the Bible, it says, and this is from Romans 12:1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will, or its good, pleasing, and perfect will. You see, that moment was my renewing of the mind. That moment was the sacrifice of my living body, my will, my struggle as I surrendered to the higher will. Sacrifice literally means to be made sacred. And I feel that in that moment, I made sacred everything that I had been through in my suffering as I turned it into my purpose and my mission. Conforming to the pattern of the world would have meant I was destined to always be a drug addict, powerless and wretched. And now, through the renewing of my mind, I get to test and approve what God's perfect, good, and pleasing will is and be a guide for you, others like you, to find your way. And in the deepest part of my soul, I believe God's good and perfect will for each and every one of you, for me, for you, for all of us, is to find our way home, to find our way back to ultimate truth. And through this podcast, through my work as a coach, as a teacher, as a minister, as a spiritual practitioner, I get to be a sacred vessel for that truth. And so, my friends, that is what I am here to offer you. That is what I am here to share with you through this podcast, through these conversations, through the guests I'll have on sometimes, through our beautiful community in New Thought Global and Society. And so if that resonates with you and you feel that it is part of your good and perfect will for you to find your way home, if you are craving to come home, to come back into truth, you will know it at the deepest, as I have chills, you will know it at the deepest part of your soul. I invite you to join us. I invite you to be here with us. And just in this moment, as we close, I want to take a moment to just fully recognize each and every one of you as powerful, powerful, powerful creators. And I just declare right here, right now, that each of you has found your way here for a reason. I know that you have a purpose. I know that you have a calling. And I declare and I recognize that whatever it is you might be going through, wherever it is you may be questioning or feeling the struggle, I know that for you too, it is perfect and divine. I know that right here, right now, your mind is being renewed. You are being called. And I just invite you to open to that calling. I invite you to receive that calling. And it's with so much gratitude. I just release these words. I recognize you. I send you love. And I just encourage you to remember who you are. Go forth out into the world. Be wildly you. That is all you need to do. And I know how powerful I am. I know that my mind is the divine mind and that we are all one. So I know that if I can do it, you can do it. And I know that God has a good and perfect will for each and every one of you. And so if you would like help discovering what that is, reach out to me all over social media. Lindsay Caracardi. I am Linz Caracardi on Instagram. Can find me anywhere. Send me a message. Reach out. Feel free to share your experience. Share this podcast with someone who may need it. And I look forward to getting to know you all. Have a beautiful day. Hey, Divine Badass. Thank you again for tuning in to the SOULbriety Podcast, where we talk all things from addiction to awakening and the recovery of self, soul, and spirit from being strung out on the greatest drug of all, the external world. So if you know someone that would benefit from joining in our illuminating conversations, please feel free to share this podcast with a friend. And remember, leave a 5-star review if you loved this episode, if you're loving this message, and you know that you are ready to see the world move into SOULbriety. Those reviews really help. And please don't hesitate to connect with me on any of the socials. You can find me on Facebook at Linz Caracardi or over on the Instagram at I am Linz Caracardi. And be sure to check out the link in my bio and the description for this podcast for some free gifts, resources, your Badass Conscious Creator's Guide, as well as meditations and other ways that we can work together. Go out into the world, be wildly you, and have it all. See you next time.